Joining us now is former Deputy National Security Advisor during President Trump's first term and the Heritage Foundation Senior Fellow, Victoria Coates. Victoria, so great to have you tonight on this really important topic. It certainly seems like pressure around Venezuela continuing to escalate. We have this interdiction now involving oil tankers off the coast of Venezuela. This comes after multiple strikes on suspected narco-terrorist drug vessels, increased military presence in the area. So, Victoria, I'm curious, where do you think this is headed? We just heard President Trump talking about this is about stopping the flow of illicit drugs and drug trafficking into the United States. But I think a lot of people might be wondering, is this about something more? Is this possibly heading to a regime change? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, Lydia, David, great to be with you. I think this is about protecting the American people. That's the bottom line. And what we have these cartels out of Venezuela doing is running drugs, running weapons, running people into the United States that threaten America. And that's why the president wants to pay attention to this, wants to get after this situation, because this isn't a normal sort of criminal activity that you can use law enforcement to get after. These cartels are connected to the government of Venezuela. And so on the one hand, he's going after the flow of drugs, but also the flow of illegal oil. American major Chevron still deals with Venezuela. Those are legal shipments. This is the shadow fleet. These are boats that are not properly flagged. They're not properly insured. They're not properly maintained. This could be an environmental disaster in the Caribbean. But Maduro wants this to keep going because it's his cash flow. That's what the president's going to take care of.
Victoria, there's another level to this thing, which is that the allies of Maduro are internationalists who hate the United States, namely China and Russia. They have factions in Venezuela right now. The question is, will they do anything to keep their puppet Maduro in there? And what happens to the Cubans that are there militarily? Are they going to take part in any kind of fight?
Well, they're certainly going to try, David. And I thought it was interesting when the second ship was captured over the weekend. The Chinese complained because apparently that was going to China. That's their cheap, illegal oil going to China. And they depend on that for, I believe, about 7% of their energy imports. But what could they do? They couldn't do a darn thing about it, because even with China's significant military buildup, they still don't have the kind of force projection that we have at sea. That's why the president's announcement about the Trump-class battleships this afternoon is so important. He's signaling we're going to keep that edge. We're going to keep being able to do this. We're going to enforce the law here against these ships. And you guys can buy regularly priced energy. There's lots on the market, particularly from the Middle East, that China could buy because of increased U.S. production. That's just fine. You can have that, but we're going to cut off your cheap illegal supply. So I think that's really important in terms of China. But then just quickly in terms of Cuba, if Cuba isn't getting that subsidized oil from Venezuela, are they really going to spend a lot of time and energy sending their security apparatus to Venezuela to prop up Maduro? I don't think so.
Victoria, how long do you think Venezuela will be able to withstand this type of pressure campaign? I mean, at some point, they're going to have to do something, especially if their oil reserves are, kind of coming under pressure here.
Well, I think the signal's been sent very clearly to Nicolas Maduro that there is an off-ramp for him. The president talked to him last month on the phone, I think made that very clear, that he and his immediate family could leave. That option remains open, but I don't think he's going to get a lot of support from his generals, those so-called de los soles, those high-ranking military officers who are also dabbling in the cartel world. If he can't pay them, they're not going to stay loyal to him. That's all they care about, is the money. So if that starts to be cut off because of these ships, the interdicting of the ships, then he's not going to have a lot there at home. I think he then takes the option to leave.
The administration does not want to use the phrase regime change because they know it's had very bad results in the past. The president has sort of campaigned against it. But there is going to, if Maduro leaves or if he's taken out militarily in some way, there is going to be a regime change. How does that happen? Well, we know Maria Machado, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, is her party won the last election. I think it was 2 years ago. Maduro kept power. So how do you do regime change under those circumstances?
Well, I think that's really for the people of Venezuela, David, that this is their decision to make. They did speak clearly at the ballot box. Estimates are as high as 80% of them voted for Maria Corina's candidate in that election. And so I think if the people of Venezuela decide this is what they want to do internally, that the United States would stand by to assist, as would very, very strong neighbors of Venezuela, countries that have taken a more conservative bent recently, Chile, Paraguay, Argentina. All of these countries can help. And that there is still sort of memory in Venezuela of when they were a much more functioning, successful, prosperous country. And so those institutions can be rebooted. Military to military relationships can be rebooted. I think there's a lot of hope there, but I agree with the president. That's not our errand here. Our errand is to keep the American people safe.
And Victoria, you just mentioned, battleships a few moments ago. President Trump announcing his plans to make American battleships superior. Listen to this.
I have approved a plan for the Navy to begin the construction of 2 brand new, very large, the largest we've ever built, battleships. We're going to be going to a superior aircraft. We have the Ford class. We're going to be upping that to a different class of aircraft carrier. And we haven't built a battleship since 1994. These cutting-edge vessels will be some of the most lethal surface warfare ships. It will be actually the most ever built other than our submarines.
Gosh, we just heard from him right there. Haven't built battleships since 1994, 30 years roughly. Seems like we are probably in need of some updated battleships. Your thoughts on that?
No, Lydia, we definitely need a tech upgrade. I mean, remember the car you were driving in 1994 versus the one you got out of this evening. That's the kind of tech upgrade we're talking about here. And so the president talked a little bit about the bells and whistles that will be on these battleships. Probably we shouldn't know too many things about that. But imagine, if he's able to bring these things in on time and on budget. The Ford is a mighty, mighty aircraft carrier. It's our most modern. It's down in the Caribbean right now, but it took years longer than it should have and cost billions more than it should have. If you have a president that's actually going to be a stickler about being on time and on budget, this is going to be a massive upgrade for our Navy. As I said, this is what's going to keep us able to be the preeminent force projecting power on the seas.
Well, Victoria, we heard President Trump talking about starting with 2 battleships, hopefully escalating up to 10 in the not too distant future. So we'll track that progress. Victoria Coates, so great to have you with us tonight. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, guys. Take care.